Highness and all the distinguished citizens of Bangalore gathered here. We are here to remember a very, very special person. And it is a mark of how special he was that we have such a distinguished gathering here in Bengaluru at such a short notice. Just at a time when in Delhi right now, a prayer meeting is being held in Gurudwara for Dr. Manmohan Singh. We are here in Bangalore to remember him, to cherish his memory, to remember a great son of this soil, to remember someone who brought the kind of changes that we need to really think about. I would like to begin by thanking Atiq Saab for making my job easy, because many of the things that I wanted to mention, he was himself personally involved in that, and he has mentioned that. So that takes away some of the load from what I wanted to say. I should also thank Jagrit Karnataka for holding this discussion, which is not merely the standard Indian-style ritual, praises that we lavish on someone who has passed away. That's a very, very Indian ritual style of doing things. At the end of it, you learn nothing. We have this utterly meaningless ritual that happens in our public life. Everyone's death is passing of an era, end of a chapter of history, a deep vacuum that can never be filled, and things of that side. I mean, we've filled our public life with such nonsense that we actually don't even get to see what is it that we've missed by missing someone, because the same phrases are used all the time. I'm very grateful to Jagrit Karnataka that we have organized a meeting where people who've worked with him, who've looked at him, are here for somewhat serious reflection. This is obviously not the stage to look at him as historians would, maybe 30 years from now, 50 years from now. He did believe that history would look at him more kindly, and he was absolutely right. And maybe 50 years later, a historian might look at him even more kindly than we do today. But that's not our job right now. What I would like to do is to begin by setting aside some of the things that we've heard in the last few days, because I think it's important to get rid of some misguided praise and some misguided criticism that we have witnessed in the last 7-10 days. And then I will focus on 3 frames through which we should see him: personal, political, and policy. Misguided praise and misguided criticism. There is a usual thing that we all talk about. He was a very polite person. Of course he was. He was a very soft-spoken person. As one of those persons who has a reputation for being soft-spoken, I can tell you, but being soft-spoken is not necessarily a great virtue. It depends on what you speak, not the softness of whether you speak this way or that way. But more importantly, what I hear in the last few days is a middle-class fantasy. Someone who went to Oxford and Cambridge was our Prime Minister. I think a lot of people in this country would like to believe that this was a great virtue. I'm not entirely sure it was a great virtue. I think Dr. Manmohan Singh became Prime Minister not because he went to Oxford and Cambridge. He became Prime Minister despite the fact that he went to Oxford and Cambridge. And that's how public life should be. Because if you start taking great pride in his being Oxbridge, then you have to be very embarrassed about Kamaraj. You have to be very embarrassed about Karpuri Thakur. I'm not embarrassed. I'm proud of the country where Kamaraj and Karpuri Thakur and Lalu Yadav were there. So I think we can set aside a certain kind of faint praise some praise is actually more damaging than criticism. Also, we should set aside some very silly criticism that we have seen in the last 10 days or so. He was an accidental prime minister, we are told. Who is not an accident? The only difference is some are good accidents and some are very, very bad accidents. That's the only difference. Was Mr. Devegowda not an accident? If I'm allowed to say so in Bengaluru? Think of Mr. Gujral. Think of Indira Gandhi, an accident of birth. What else was that? And can I speak about a very bad accident that happened 10 years ago? Was that not an accident in this country? So I think let's forget these things about accidental this or that, etc. The other thing is, he was being guided by someone from behind. Is that such a bad thing? Was he being guided by some businessman? Was he being paid by someone from Ahmedabad to run this country? He was being guided by someone who people of India had voted to become prime minister and who refused to become the prime minister. So what is this shady thing? As if someone is whispering about some secret affair that's happened in the dark alleys of Delhi's corridors. No, sir, this is a straightforward democratic thing. And as he himself said more than once to people, look, you can't have two power centers. Basic decisions are taken by the party, namely by the leader of the party. What's so strange about it? Why are we so embarrassed or scandalized about these things? This is how democracy works. If I'm given a choice between one leader who's not guided by anyone and one leader who is guided by some people, I would prefer the leader who's guided by someone. I sometimes suspect that my leader today is not guided by anyone. I can tell you, you cannot have a decision like demonetization if you are guided by any sane person on this earth. That's why I said, let's get aside some of the stuff that's being talked about. But more seriously, I think the one question that has come again and again in the last few days, especially to people like me who praise him, you were the ones who criticized him. Of course, yes, we criticized, not him personally. I do remember speaking specifically even on India Against Corruption platform. I said the Prime Minister is personally honest. But what about the rest of it? So yes, we criticized him. Yes, we led agitations against him in public. When he was in the PMO, I think I was facing some lathis from the government. So yes, the serious question to ask is, do you have to be someone's bhakt to be able to appreciate that person? Ram Manohar Lohia said something beautiful about Mahatma Gandhi. When Gandhi was dead, I think about 15 years after Gandhiji passed away. Ram Manohar Lohia said the biggest danger to Gandhi's memory is from the Gandhians. He named some people, I would not name them, they are great people now. But the basic point Ram Manohar Lohia made was this. He said that if anyone would rescue Gandhi, it is not Gandhians. It is the heretics. Those who critiqued Gandhi, those who had the courage to distance themselves from Gandhi, they are the ones who would rescue the legacy of Gandhi. And today when I look back, Lohia was absolutely right. So the idea that in order to appreciate someone, you have to endorse everything that person did is a ridiculous idea. It's a dangerous idea. I have enormous regard for Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Saheb. Do I endorse either Baba Saheb or Gandhi in the Pune debate? No, I don't. So do I not appreciate Baba Saheb? I do. So that we need a bit of critical distancing, and I think it's the critics, if I'm allowed to take Lohia's line, those who actually can see Manmohan Singh and UPA regimes with some distance as a critic, their appreciation may actually be more substantive than those who may be full-fledged bhakts. Let me now turn to three frames: personal, political, and policy. On the personal front, I think something that absolutely stood out about him was deep personal integrity. When he presented that budget as a finance minister, as everyone knows, he drove his Maruti 800 personally. Now, these are not necessarily virtues which would define a person completely. Many not so honest people have also done good things in public life. But do remember, this is the time when country's economic policy was being changed. This is the time when every single decision taken by Dr. Manmohan Singh, many of those were not even understood by the Prime Minister of that time, Narasimha Rao, because these are such technical decisions of policy that were taking place. And later on, when he became the Prime Minister, the kind of decisions that you take, and Atiq Saab would know that, a minor little comma somewhere can transfer 1,000 crore rupees to a company. This is the kind of decisions you take. At that time, for someone whose personal integrity could not be questioned by anyone, not even by his critics, at least by sane critics. And once when a little allegation of coal scam came to him personally, many journalists have recorded that, how anguished he was and how completely silly that particular allegation was. So there is an element of deep personal probity, integrity, which we should normally take for granted in public life. But can we? Sitting here in Karnataka, in Bengaluru, or places in Delhi where I spend my time, this is something you can hardly take for granted in most people who occupy high offices. There was also the other thing that Atiq Saab brought out. Not just being soft-spoken, but actually ability to learn from anyone and everyone. I remember meeting him, my first serious meeting him was in 2003 when he was in opposition. He was the leader of the House, leader of the upper house then. And Congress had lost 3 elections. So somehow, some people in Congress thought they should call a psephologist to explain to them why they lost. Normally, I understand politicians know why they lose elections. But somehow Congress thought it was wise, and there was a committee presided by Pranab Mukherjee. Manmohan Singh ji was there, and I think at that time, Manishankar Iyer ji had called me, so he was in that committee. There was someone else as well. So I went there prepared. I was a professional analyst of election those days. I went prepared with my bullet points and so on, and I made those presentations. Pranab Mukherjee ji, of course, was very, very sharp. I was absolutely astonished with Pranab Mukherjee's political understanding. He clearly knew more than any political scientist could understand politics. Manmohan Singh ji kept just quiet throughout the meeting. Towards the end, he asked me 2 technical questions about sample size and about sampling methodology. I said, what? Honestly, this was my first reaction. That here is this political leader who's interested in technicalities of sampling and methodology. It's only later that it struck me that, this person who clearly knew more technique than I did, who knew more economics and econometrics than I did, who was senior, he was my father's age, he did not have to prove that he knew more than I did. He could just relate to me as if he was my student. This is amazing. Very few, most of us, and that includes people like me, we need to tell within a 10-minute meeting, we need to assert ourselves. We need to tell someone that, look, I know this, I know that, etc. This ability not to impose yourself and just keep learning is very, very unusual. And of course, the sheer humility, which everyone who met him has noticed, getting up to welcome a young bureaucrat, genuine humility, which you find. I suspect that many of Dr. Manmohan Singh's virtues look much bigger today than they looked 10 years ago, thanks to the person who's sitting in the chair after him. Because, suddenly you feel humility is a virtue, not being arrogant is such a nice thing, listening and learning from others is such a wonderful idea, and not being driven by a business house is so rare, etc. But I think there is there's a slot in India's public mind, which I call the Lal Bahadur Shastri slot. We have a special slot in our emotional memory, which is reserved for people of humility, of integrity, of simplicity. President Abdul Kalam also occupies that slot for very many people. In that sense, Manmohan Singh ji, my sense is that the more distance we acquire in history, his name would be taken along with Lal Bahadur Shastri. And that category of Indian public life. Indian public tolerates corruption. It tolerates a lot of corruption, more than it should. But it does reserve a very, very special place for people who are not. And Manmohan Singh ji occupied that space. His personality reminds us of something that's very rapidly fading away from our public life. That's the personal. On political, I would say only two things. One, what is considered his biggest weakness, to my mind, was his biggest strength, which is he was not taking decisions himself. I personally think it's such a bad idea for any prime minister to be taking decisions himself. I don't know why it's been glorified. It is the nature of Indian civilization is such that any power arrangement needs to be coalitional arrangement. Coalition is not a special condition of power. Coalition is the most natural condition of power in a civilization like India. And I keep joking with my friends. When I was in political science, I used to say India has always had coalition government. We were writing in 1990s when United Front government had been formed, and people used to say, oh my God, coalition government has arrived in India. And I used to say, no, India has always been governed by coalitions. They would say, how? I said, well, now the coalition is called United Front. Earlier, the name of the coalition used to be Indian National Congress. Indian National Congress is a coalition, has always been a coalition. It's a coalition of regions, coalition of ideologies, coalitions of social interests. And that actually fits the nature of this country. And in that sense, Dr. Manmohan Singh exemplified that coalitional nature of power, which is to say consultative across layers, and consultation is not always something that yields very fast results. Consultation is also not something that always leads to the best consequences. But it prevents you from the worst consequences. And it, in the long run, develops something which on balance contributes to taking your civilization and country forward. Coalitions are painful things to watch, because every day you get some news tamasha happening. This person has threatened, that blackmail is happening. And a lot of media was quite occupied in those things. This minister is doing that minister is doing that, etc. But this is inherently the nature of coalitional politics. It's pulls and pressures of coalition which actually generate what we call democracy. And in that sense, Dr. Manmohan Singh exemplified it. That is something we don't quite see that way. And second is something that has been mentioned again and again by many people, his respect for dissent, for differences, for opposition, which has, of course, once again been so put in sharp focus because of the regime that has come thereafter. as someone who opposed him, I can tell you, I met him when he was not a PM, which I've mentioned to you. I met him when he was PM. After that, I opposed him on streets. I was involved in an agitation targeting his government. And I met him after that. I can tell you, it did not make one difference to the affection that he had towards people like me. He had a very Punjabi accent. Oxbridge, all right, but his accent was very Punjabi. So he would not, like Bengalis do not call me Yogendra, Bengalis call me Yogendro. And the Punjabi pronunciation of my name is Yogendra. So he would just very softly and with such affection, when I met him a couple of years after, he was not the prime minister, and obviously anyone could have blamed people like me. You were the people who were responsible for bringing my government down. Nothing of that sort. Not one iota of unease, anger, angst, complaint. He just wanted to know from me, how do we take this country forward now? Because Modi government had unleashed some of its plans, and he was very anguished about it. He was not the Congress leader. He was not in contention anymore. He was just a concerned citizen who wanted to learn from his opponents about how to take this country forward. That's so completely rare. And this acceptance of divergence of opinion, as some people have reminded, Jawaharlal Nehru Students' Union took a decision to oppose the Prime Minister when he would come to JNU. Or something of that kind. There was a decision because Omar Khalid has written about it. And the Vice Chancellor, of course, thought this was going to be a very bad thing, so the Vice Chancellor decided to take action against students. And a message went from the PMO to say, don't take action against students. It's perfectly all right for them to wish to oppose the Prime Minister. Now, this is the essence of democracy. That is what we should remember him politically for. Finally, on the policy front, I think you mentioned that in your introduction. The fact is that people like us, that probably many who are present here, we were all initiated into politics on an opposition of LPG. I can tell you about myself. In the 90s, when we were entering politics, the one thing that we learned was that LPG was the biggest disaster that happened to this country. Mr. Manmohan Singh is personally responsible for that disaster. This is how we were taught. And although none of us questioned his personal integrity, because that was really beyond reproach, but many of us did believe that liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which we all clubbed together in one single package, we thought this policy took India, this was a U-turn in India's policy, and it would be a disaster for India. I know most of my friends continue to believe so. And they would today appreciate Dr. Manmohan Singh for his secularism, for his other things that Atiq Saab mentioned. But I think it's time to ask ourselves a question. If I ask myself what I thought would happen after LPG to India, did it actually happen? I was taught by my respected ideologues, all of us who belong to different shades of the left, we were all taught that India was headed for a complete disaster. That did not happen. We were taught that India was about to be economically colonized by the US. It did not happen that way. I'm not saying that I have become an advocate of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. All I'm saying is that someone like Manmohan Singh left a question with us, a question which is an uncomfortable question for us. You know, unfortunately, most of the memorial meetings are about matching the belief of the person who's passed away with myself. Whatever matches my belief, I praise that. Whatever doesn't match, I keep quiet about it. I think a more honest appraisal would require that we also let the light reflect on us as well. If you look at the speech given by Dr. Manmohan Singh in 1991, he does not say that privatization was something that should have happened 50 years ago and it has been delayed. No. He says, now we have reached a point where I think India can take on global competition. It's a very different argument from the argument of a this doctrine of free market fundamentalism. What I'm trying to say is, Manmohan Singh was not a free market fundamentalist. As Atiq Saab's story about agriculture and agricultural loan waiver shows, any free market fundamentalist would have opposed it. He did not. So what he offered to us was a different version of capitalism. I must confess, I used to joke about it. One must be honest in these meetings, in appraisals and so on. I used to say, well, we have an option between capitalism and capitalism with 20% discount. So this is capitalism with 20% discount. Now that I reflect on my own jokes and think about it, 2 or 3 things strike me. Number one, 20% discount is not a small thing. It's a matter of life and death for maybe 20% population of this country. Things like Narega, things like RTE, things like loan waiver for the farmers. And yes, Atiq Saab mentioned something which most people don't remember. The MSP for farmers was raised on a quantum during that period, which India has never seen before or after. Notwithstanding any claims that are being made later, because I look at these statistics, the MSP rise, especially what happened during 2008, 9, and 10, and I should like to believe that he had some hand in it, during the kind of raise that happened at that point is absolutely unprecedented in the history of Indian agriculture. And the agricultural growth that took place from 2004 to 2013 is also unprecedented in the history of Indian agriculture. So in a sense, Dr. Manmohan Singh's policies invite us to think afresh, because we operated with a simple binary of capitalist and socialist. What we probably did not see were various shades of capitalism and the range of political possibilities that each shade offered. What he did, and the number of schemes that Atiq Saab has mentioned, this was an attempt to reinstitute Nehruvian nation building in a new context. IITs, IIMs, and public education. This was the last time any Indian leader worried about public education, which is completely finished now. I mean, basically, we've simply outsourced our education completely. So this is a moment in our national history. People I did over this country actually worried and thought about public education and thought this was priority. So it offers us a different, there are 3 things here, I'll just mention that and then stop. One, Manmohan Singh's policies demonstrated that you could have capitalism which is not crony capitalism. A capitalist economic policy which is not being done in the interest of one business house or another business house, which is not, there were charges of corruption, and there were serious charges of corruption. I would not stand on this stage today and forget all that. But the overall frame of economic policies was not being driven to benefit one house or the other, the manner in which it's happening today. Number 2, while the focus was on growth, a safety net was being provided all the time with one scheme or the other. Manrega being one classic example of a safety net. The country and the world forgets today that the free food for 80 crore people is not Mr. Modi's invention. That is actually NFSA, is Congress government's scheme. Although the country today remembers it as Mr. Modi's scheme. So social nets were being provided, number two. And the third thing is that this economic policy unleashed entrepreneurial spirit, which we, the socialists and leftists, have very seriously underestimated and undervalued. I keep joking with my friends like Dr. Vasu that all of us socialists want to be ministers of expenditure. We don't want to be finance ministers. We want some Manmohan Singh to earn the money for us, and then we want to tell him where to spend that money. I think it's so people like Dr. Manmohan Singh actually remind us that the economic policy issues that he framed for this country are issues where a simple and lazy criticism will not do. I'm still not a convert to that policy. But he, and I would say among the proponents of liberalization, only he, because he practiced it in a way which was clean, which was humane. He leaves us with a question which is not a personal question, a question which is not just a technical economics question, a question which is about the future of our country. And it is in the nature of great leaders and great minds that not only do they guide us, not only do they answer many things for us, they also leave us with some very big questions. I remember Dr. Manmohan Singh and pay my sincere condolences to his memory, to his family, to everyone. Thank you.